This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Colectivo Coffee. Handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to The Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I want to play something for you.
God damn!
You're hearing Tinfoil by Rainer Maria, featuring my guest, William Kuehn, on drums. Formed in 1995 in Madison, the band started out playing basements, and over the course of the subsequent decade, recorded 5 albums and a handful of EPs, toured relentlessly, and built a substantial and devoted fan base. I grew up in Milwaukee, and a band I played in high school played many early shows with Rainer Maria. I was always struck by William's innovative self-taught technique and his dynamic sensitivity as he deftly alternated between pummeling and caressing his stylish Tiger's Eye pawn shop drum kit. Rainer Maria went on hiatus in 2006, but William has remained active, touring with bands such as The Teenagers, Golden Filter, and Prosaics. He's currently preparing for a tour with Meredith Graves, and the reunited Rainer Maria is writing a new album. And now our interview with William Kuehn.
Both of my grandfathers, actually, on my mother and my dad's side, were musicians.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So, you're part Native American, correct?
Both of my parents are mixed Native and European.
German,
Native, and then Polish Native.
Okay, so what kind of musicians were your grandfathers?
My grandfather on my father's side was a big band. He played a horn in Chicago for a number of years. And my grandfather on my mother's side played accordion in polka bands in Wisconsin up until, maybe a few years before he passed away. Mm-hmm. So,
what was your first punk show?
My first punk show was the Dead Kennedys when I was 11 years old.
Where did they play?
They played in Oshkosh.
And did De Kreutzen play with them or something like that?
I can't remember. No, I think it was Verbal Abuse was on tour with them. Mm-hmm. And it was so long ago, I can't remember if there was like a local opener.
What about punk music resonated with you at that young of an age? It seems like you were a pretty happy kid.
I was generally, but I felt a bit of an outsider because I looked a little bit different than everyone. The community that I grew up in, it was, I would say, 90% Caucasian kids.
I would say even more, right?
Probably even more than that, yeah. I think I'm being a little generous there. So I felt a bit of an outsider.
Is that something you were conscious of?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Did people think you were Asian?
Everyone thought I was Asian, yeah. So that wasn't necessarily confusing, but at a young age having to explain to everyone about my parents was interesting, and it lent to a certain sensitivity that kind of maybe spawned my interest in music and art and kind of exploring things outside of my community so I could find something to relate to.
How did your parents meet?
My mother was walking down Main Street in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin when she was 16 years old. My dad was driving a car down the street when he was 18 years old. And
sounds like he had the upper hand.
He saw her, and it was love at first sight.
Wow.
So he pulled over immediately.
And they're still together.
They're still together.
Do you feel like having that as your kind of template has made it more difficult to find somebody as an adult? Do you think your expectations are higher than maybe would be realistic, given that your parents were lucky to find each other?
Like, how do you mean expectations higher as far as like the
Like,
culture?
were you expecting to, run into your soulmate by the time you were 18? Like, when you were a
Yes.
kid, is that what your expectation was?
Absolutely. That's how I thought people met and what happened. You met at a young age, or not even necessarily at a young age, but when you met someone and fell in love, that was going to be it. So I didn't necessarily even consider the fact that people could grow apart after spending a couple of years with each other. So, which has happened, multiple times with me, and I think with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So yeah,
with
you're right.
Most people, I would say.
I think most
Yeah.
people, right?
Or at least most relationships.
Right.
So you're going to shows. Were you a good student in school?
I was up until a certain point. I think maybe my junior year in high school when things started to drop off a little bit. But yeah, before that, I was straight A student, gifted and talented program. I was pretty excited about being in school. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
When did you get into drums?
At the very end of high school, I didn't really consider being a musician until maybe I was 17 years old.
Yeah, because like for me, it was I got into drums, and then around that same time, that's when school dropped off for me.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
when I was in middle school. But what happened with you? Like you just were over it, or what?
School?
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think they did coincide.
Okay.
Like I found something that I was really passionate about and I could kind of focus on, and school kind of slowly slid down the ladder of priorities.
So how did you start playing drums? Did you take lessons?
I've never taken lessons, and I chose the drums because there was a group of us that wanted to start a band, and I was the last to come in, and the drums were the only instrument that was needed at the time.
What did you want to do with your life at that point?
I had no idea. At that point in my life, when I turned 18, I thought I was fairly lucky to still be around.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you do lots of drugs as a kid?
I did a fair amount of experimentation, yeah.
Did you engage in other risky behavior?
No, not really. I feel like there was... I experimented with drugs, but because my relationship with my parents was so strong, they were always in the back of my mind, and I didn't want to necessarily disappoint them or make them feel bad or stressed out about, my situation or my future. So I didn't do anything too horribly risky, I guess, for the most part. Maybe there were one or two incidents that happened.
Like what?
Well, the week after I graduated high school, I got on a Greyhound bus and moved to San Francisco.
And Greyhound buses.
Yeah, and I ended up crashing at a squat in the East Bay in Emeryville, and I got into some stuff there.
Like heroin and stuff?
Nothing that serious that I want to talk about necessarily.
Okay, got it.
But yeah, I mean, it was a really dark scene. I guess at any squat, there's a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. And the East Bay, the music scene was really vibrant. That's why I went out there. I didn't go out there to do drugs.
Were you a fan of Lookout and such?
Absolutely. Lookout and Very Small Records, and I knew some people in those bands through being pen pals with them. So I had...
Were you pen pals with Aaron Comet Bus?
Yeah. I'd written back and forth with Aaron Comet Bus, with Lance Hahn from J Church, who was a huge influence on me, both my music and personal life, and still is to this day. So all those characters were just so inspirational to not only my music, but my politics as well, and general way of living.
Mm-hmm. When you were in high school, were you dating a lot?
I really didn't date very much. No long-term relationship.
Did you feel like a handsome guy? Or did you feel, like, well, okay, you were saying that you felt different from everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I had similar issues, but they were probably more subconscious. But, like I'm half Asian, and that's not even a big deal. But there were hardly any Asian kids at my school in Wisconsin.
Right.
And I didn't really... I think I probably just defaulted to like a white cultural identity in some ways,
I did as well.
mainstream.
I did as well, and that's just a matter of, especially when you're an adolescent, you want to be accepted. Mm-hmm. you don't want to feel like an outsider. So I feel like I did the same thing that you did probably. Kind of lean more towards the Caucasian, Anglo-European side of your heritage to fit in.
I was talking to my friend Sandy Vu, who plays drums for Dum Dum Girls,
Okay.
and she's a guitarist too. And she was saying that in her community, lots of the first generation Asian kids kind of defaulted to kind of like a black cultural identity because they felt like they were the others, and that was the prevalent other identity that they could default to.
Really? That's
Yeah.
interesting. That they could identify.
They
with
could
that
identify
culture
with
as
feeling like they're an
outsiders.
outsider.
Right.
How did you end up in Madison?
Well, I came back from San Francisco.
How long did that last?
It didn't last very long. Maybe a number of months, but not an extended period of time. I came back and I was feeling a little lost, and I decided to enroll in school just because it was something that was structured, which I felt like I needed. At the time, I didn't have any set goal that could be fulfilled by going and getting a 4-year degree, but that was the way for me to be grounded and try to figure out the next step without having to grow up and get a real job. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Madison, started university, and almost immediately got involved in the
So you must not have
DIY
fucked up
scene.
your grades that much, because that's not an easy school to get into.
No, but you know what? I did go to the UW Extension in Fond du Lac first for a
Okay.
little bit, and then that enabled me to transfer to Madison because it is a difficult school to get into.
Okay, so who was the fan of Rilke?
I think Kyle at the time was the one that introduced us. But it was all, we were all aware, and Kyle and Caitlin had met in a poetry class, so...
I mean, that's pretty fucking emo.
Yeah, there are a few other poets that could be a little more emo.
the band started in a
real
poetry
quick,
class,
in a poetry class. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Kyle and I had been in a punk band before. Well, it was a kind of an emo, right to springy band called Ezra Pound. Mm-hmm. So
you had a kind of tight naming system.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We don't stray from the formula.
How did you meet Kyle and Caitlin?
Through DIY shows. Kyle was setting up a few shows in Madison at his house in various spaces, and I was going to those shows. And I had a car. No one else had a car, so I would
Were
bring.
you older than them?
We're all the same age.
Okay.
So I offered to drive PA gear around and help with the shows, and we hit it off. And Ezra Pound was already going, and Kyle was playing drums and singing, and he wanted to focus just on singing and maybe picking up the guitar. And they asked if I wanted to play drums, and that's how we started playing together.
Did you feel like you had a magical connection with them when you first started playing?
It felt very comfortable. Yeah, it felt pretty effortless. After the first, I was fairly nervous the first few rehearsals, of course, because it was new and I wanted to, make sure that I was a good fit. I was trying really hard, but then after a while, it just felt so natural, and it felt great. It felt like this is what I wanted to do with my life, which was really fortunate to figure out by the time you're 20 years old. I think.
You were out of school by then?
No, we were all in college at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, we were all, I think, maybe 19 or 20.
Mm-hmm. How would you characterize the dynamic within the band? The other two people in the band, Caitlin and Kyle, were a couple at the time, right? So how did it work creatively and just logistically?
It's changed over the years, but for the most part, we would write the music together, the three of us in a room. And then the early years, especially when it was dueling male-female vocals, they would work on vocals and write vocals to the music. So, and then they would bring the vocals in, and sometimes there would be rehashing of the music to fit. But more often than not, the music was set first, and then they would lay vocals over it.
When you listen back to the early recordings, how does it make you feel?
I'm still really proud of what we did. I feel really good. I think a lot of the time when someone hasn't heard Rainer Maria and they ask what the sound is, I refer them to that first album. I feel like that was a pretty unique piece of music. I don't know if anything necessarily sounded like it, so I'm very proud of it because of that, and I try to turn people onto that first.
When did the next album come out?
It was about 18 months later, maybe spring of 99. Look Now, Look Again came out. And the approach was the same. We had a little more money. I think we had maybe $4,000 or $5,000 to record it. And we recorded at Smart Studios in Madison.
Right.
Which is Butch Vig's studio. And because we lived there, we were able to get in during off time to get a good rate. So we were able to take advantage of this world-class studio, but not have to pay an arm and a leg to do it.
What spurred the decision to move to the East Coast?
Everyone had a connection to the East Coast at the time. The woman
Caitlin is from Connecticut.
Connecticut. Right? So she grew up going to the city, and her family is 45 minutes away from New York. Kyle's sister at the time was attending Sarah Lawrence University. And
fancy.
Yeah. And my girlfriend at the time...
Who, Katie?
Yeah. She was...
I remember Katie, man. She was cool.
She's so cool. And she was part of a 5-year program through the UW where you did your 5th year at FIT. So she had to move to New York as well. So it was a lot.
So is she working in fashion now?
She still is, yeah.
When did you start feeling comfortable enough to date?
It was after high school, for sure. And I don't know if that's because of, I traveled a little bit and it could relate to people. Like my time in San Francisco was probably fairly influential in that. So, but yeah, and, just through simple maturation, I gained a little more self-confidence and comfort. And yeah, I think that was a big part of it. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it took me until after college before I started having serious relationships.
Right.
When I was in college, I think I probably displaced all of my sexual energy and just played drums 12 hours a day.
Right.
14 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
That's
why you're so good.
I don't know.
Part of the reason.
I mean, I think you probably have to have a personal life to be good at music too. I don't know. So and plus, like I say, I like dating outside of my social circle, and everyone that I went to school with was musicians. So
right.
I felt lucky to be at that school, and I worked really, really hard while I was there. But I ended up leaving school as well. I dropped out after a couple years.
Right.
And shortly after that, I remember coming here to New York, and you and I went and saw Elvin Jones together.
Which was
and
really...
We went to Kate's joint first, I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Where was that? The East Village, right?
Yep.
And you were living there at the time?
No, I was in Greenpoint. I moved to Greenpoint pretty much straight on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at the time, was that kind of at the peak of Rainer Maria's popularity?
See, that would have been about 2001.
Yeah, it was right after 9/11.
Right. We were doing really well, and we didn't have day jobs, and we were making a pretty good living. And at that point, we had kind of given in to being a part of the music industry, and in our own way, we carved out our own niche to be able to operate on our own terms still, because we were still working with Polyvinyl, who we had been working with since the beginning. So we had a great relationship, and they respected our boundaries, and we respected kind of them trying to get the most out of the music once we had completed the album as far as like taking interviews and doing press. We were always very open to that. Anything that would help him promote our album and help, both of us.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we had gotten to a really comfortable space to be able to make a living as musicians around that time, which went on pretty much through the end of the band.
When did the band end?
Our last show was December 2006 in New York.
So that was, what, a 12-year run or something?
It was almost 12 years, yeah.
What brought on the end of the band?
And there were a couple different things we wanted.
Had Kyle and Caitlin broken up at that point?
Yeah. They, I think it was maybe around the time that you saw us, 2001, 2002.
Mm-hmm.
That they were no longer a couple. And hats off to them to be able to persevere after a 7-year relationship and still be able to...
How did that feel for you?
Well,
Would they come to you with grievances about each other?
No, they were really good about it. I mean, we would all have conversations about things, but they were really good about keeping anything really heavy out of the band dynamic, which helped keep the band together for sure. So no one was taking sides with each other, and we were able to focus on the music and being a band, and then the personal lives were on the outside.
When the band broke up, was it mostly creative dissonance, or?
There was a bit of that, for sure. Yeah, we had all grown in different directions, and we wanted to do different things, and not necessarily music related. And I personally, I can only speak for myself, but I was a little burned out.
Did you get along with everybody still, or not so much?
Yeah, we stayed in touch. There was a time where we would talk to each other, but not on a regular basis. But there weren't any real big blow-ups or anything that, caused anyone to feel like they didn't want to ever have anything to do with another person in the band.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it was it was a good time to end it, I think,
Mm-hmm.
at that point, because we had started when we were, maybe 19 or 20 years old, and we were into our 30s at that point. So it had been almost all of our adult lives, and I think part of it was, okay, maybe we should explore a few things before we get too much further along in our lives before it's too late.
So what was your next step?
I dropped out of playing music for a while, and because I was kind of creatively burned out. That was I can only speak for myself, but on my end, it wasn't traumatic, but I was stung a little bit by not being able to work with two people that I've been working with for so long. Then I dropped out for a little bit and lived in the Middle East.
Where'd you live?
I started out in Syria. I knew someone living in Aleppo. So I went and hung out a little bit. I got into some trouble, and I ended up in Yemen.
What happened?
I was detained by the police for taking pictures.
Oh.
And I was taking pictures from my hotel room, and they said I was taking pictures of a sensitive area. Basically what happened was I was taking pictures. The hotel lobby clerk called up to my room, called me downstairs. His English was broken. He just said, "Police, come down." And there were two officers there. They didn't really speak English either. They just basically said, "You need to come with us to the police station," and the front desk clerk translated that I needed to bring my camera and computer. So I went with them. They put me in a room. There was a chair that I sat in, a desk with a chair behind it, what I can best describe as a gorilla cage that didn't go all the way up to the ceiling, and a man squatting in it. So I was in this room.
So you were in a room, and then within that room there was a gorilla cage with a man in it.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Who had, I assume, committed some crime. And after about a half hour, someone came in who could translate. I guess I couldn't find someone.
Were you afraid that they were going to put you in the cage at that point?
I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought I was maybe going to be incarcerated. But they made me delete photos on my camera, and he explained to me why. And it made me feel really uncomfortable. So I talked to my friend in Aleppo, and he said, well, if you want to stay in the Middle East, you should see Yemen, because it's incredibly beautiful. So I ended up there. And I ended up staying there for a while. I started in Sana'a, which is the capital, and the person that I stayed with had friends down in Aden, which is down on the coast, and I ended up hooking up with them and staying, and it was a great experience. Playing music, traditional folk music, and hanging out at the beach all day.
What were you playing?
I was just playing hand drums along with people who would be playing oud and singing traditional Yemeni songs. And it was a fantastic experience. It really opened my eyes and made me look at myself differently, because everyone else would be looking at me in a way that was not how I interacted with people.
How would they be looking at you?
Just out of curiosity. Everyone was incredibly friendly and wanted to know why, an American was in Yemen. This was 2008, which was, it seemed a little strange to them, but they were very welcoming. I never had to pay for accommodation. Everyone would say, "Oh, come stay with me for a while," cook me massive meals and welcome me into their homes.
Great.
Yeah, it was a fantastic experience.
What brought you back to New York?
The band, the Teenagers, they ended up needing a drummer, the band that I was tour managing, so they asked me if I wanted to play drums and go on this massive tour, which ended up lasting 18 months. So it was a chance for, more than anything, to see the world.
So when you started playing with the Teenagers, did it kind of reignite your passion for music?
That's exactly what happened.
Did it feel strange to come back to the indie rock scene after all that traveling and playing music with different people around the world?
It was refreshing.
Oh, okay.
It was definitely different, but it was refreshing because it was something that was familiar, and I was ready for something familiar at that point. And with the Teenagers, it was a little bit different than what I had done in the past as well, because it was mostly large festivals in Europe and Asia, all over the world, and the U.S. as well. So that was a new experience, but at the same time, it was familiar because it was like an indie rock crowd, or a crowd that I could immediately relate to without having to expend too much intellectual energy.
Mm-hmm. When did you start tossing around the idea of getting Rainer Maria back together?
It was a few years ago. Kyle had been living in Thailand, and he had been coming back, I think twice a year. And the three of us met up just as a kind of a get-together. Actually, I think Polyvinyl wanted to reissue one of our recordings, I think an EP on vinyl, because it had never seen vinyl. And that brought the three of us together. And we all got along famously, like no time had transpired. And I think that planted the seed of us coming back together and at least trying to play music. Maybe not necessarily like getting the band back together, but seeing what it would be like if the three of us got in a room and tried to write a song.
You played at Bowery Ballroom on New Year's Eve.
Right.
And was that your first show back together?
That was.
How did it feel?
It was fantastic. I actually, honestly, I don't remember the first 10 minutes of being on stage because it was emotionally fairly intense and quite surreal.
Did Katie come?
No, she didn't come. That may have made it even more surreal. But yeah, just
it's like going and visiting your childhood home or something, or
or childhood. All these emotions came over me like a wave.
Going on a date with your ex-girlfriend. Or
yeah, that's a good analogy. But this wave of different emotions that I had attached to individual songs came over me over the course of the first 3 or 4 songs that really overwhelmed me. And honestly, I don't remember even playing the drums until maybe about the 5th song in. And then I kind of settled in and, had a smile on my face the rest of the set.
So now that you've reconnected, what are your plans?
we're writing for an album, and hope to put it out early next year. We're not really focused on what the final piece is going to be. The first couple albums that we did, we never really took that approach. We just write songs as they came. Mm-hmm. And now, because you're not in the middle of an album cycle, like where you put out an album, you tour, and you have to put out another one between 18 and 24 months later to keep people interested. Because we've been away so long, we have the luxury of being able to take as much time as we want. So we're treating it as a brand new first album.
Right.
So, and we're loving being able to have that freedom to do that. So we're not on a set schedule. We're just writing them as they come.
Are you happy with how it's going?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it.
Cool.
William Kuehn, thank you for being here. But to me, you're always going to be Bill.
Thanks so much, Joe.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.